I haven't heard about it and very interested to understand what it's about. I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Bradley. I now recognize Mr. Belarakis for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you for holding this hearing. I want to thank Dr. Rowe as well. Thank you for your testimony. Appreciate it so very much. Dr. Franklin, quickly, what about screening more intensely for suicide awareness at DOD? Any comments on that?
Screening more intensely with DOD?
DOD, yeah.
Yes, we have there was an executive order that was pushed out in this past year, not the one that Dr. Stone mentioned in his testimony, but an earlier one. And this executive order calls for increased screening from DOD so that when troops are leaving the active duty side, they have eyes on by a medical provider, and those results are immediately pushed over to our mental health teams over on the VA side, so that there's an accurate view on the service member's mental health status before they leave active duty.
Okay, very good.
Let me add just a little bit to that. I think this is absolutely correct, but in that first executive order, the ability for us to interact with a service member in the year before they leave active duty is absolutely essential, and the authorities you've granted us in allowing us to see service members for that first year after they come off active duty is an absolute risk reduction. I would ask the committee to take a deep look at the work that's been done since the late 1990s in the Air Force that has actually integrated resiliency, relationship-based training, and suicide awareness amongst all active duty and reserve members of the Air Force. The Air Force has not seen the increase in the number of suicides that a number of the other uniformed services have. So this interaction and potentially modeling after the Air Force training is absolutely essential.
Very good. Well, I'd like to work with you, sir, on some legislation with regard to that, because I think that would make a big difference. I really do. Let me ask another question. I do have some prepared questions too, but I don't know, we don't have a lot of time. Can you tell me, and you may not have some statistics on this, but prior wars, prior eras, let's say the Vietnam era, even going back to World War II, give me some statistics with regard to suicide rates. How did we compare to what's going on today, the 20 a day, which is obviously one is much too high as far as I'm concerned. Can you give me any stats with regard to that? For instance, the Vietnam era, as far as the suicide rate is concerned.
Yes, absolutely, Chairman. The data collection has gotten better over the years, so sometimes it's difficult to compare data across war efforts. We've only recently gotten a lot more savvy with our data and surveillance efforts. But what I will tell you is that when we look at our current effort, we see our highest rate of suicide right now amongst 18 to 34-year-olds, when you look at the rate per 100,000, and we see our highest raw number amongst men over the age of 55, which we suspect comes from that other era, or that other war effort. And so we also know that we have more veterans in that group or in that category. And so that's what I offer, and I turn it back. Dr. Stowe may have more context.
So with regard to, how about percentages? You say you have more veterans in that category, but how about percentages?
So 21%.
I mean, we're spending more money, we have more programs, but evidently it's not doing any good.
So 21% of the suicides that we experienced in 2016 were in veterans over 75 years old.
All right.
When I add the 55 to 74 to that first group I mentioned, it adds up to over 60% of the suicides amongst veterans in this nation. Clearly, we need to recognize the fact that of the 20.4 million veterans in this nation, 77% have experienced combat. And the long-term effect on these veterans cannot be underestimated. Now, I grew up in a generational home. We were multiple generations had been in that home. Everybody on that street were generational homes. I couldn't walk out the front door as a young child, but yet I had 20 moms that were up and down that street. Just think about the neighborhoods that each of us live in today and recognize the isolation that many of us feel. I've lived in my current neighborhood for 4 years. I know the neighbors on either side. I've been in their homes. No one else. Counter that to on-base housing that I experienced on active duty. When my family and I moved into a home, every single family in the neighborhood came to bring us food, to make sure we were all right, did we need anything, and every weekend after that for weeks, we were welcomed into their homes until we became firm members of that community. This is a profound difference that we're seeing in all age groups of veterans. Certainly the 18 years of combat that we've experienced in the current environment has taken a tremendous toll on veterans under age 35. But make no mistake that the increased suicide rate amongst veterans affects all age groups.
Thank you, Dr. Stone. Thank you. Let's try to keep our comments within the 5. We have a lot of people to get through, but I allowed you to go on because it was so compelling what you were saying. Let us move on to